Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Wednesday edition of Point of View, and as you might imagine, we're going to spend a little bit of time, probably a fair amount of time in this first hour here talking about Afghanistan, because I wanted to bring some different perspectives that might be helpful to make some sense out of this. Going to be pulling some material that comes from Michael Brown. Dr. Michael Brown's, of course, been on the program with us, some from Oliver North, and maybe even a little bit from our good friend Jerry Newcomb and a few others, talking about, first of all, Afghanistan, the Taliban, also just a little bit of this new leader who at one time was an individual that was brokering a peace deal and now is looking like he will be heading up the Taliban. So we'll see where all that takes us. But I won't focus all of our time and attention on that, because there is in the White House what many people are calling a crisis of confidence. The question being raised now is, what did the president and vice president know, and when did they know it? Of course, that was a phrase used by Ted Cruz. Well, we already know what they know, because all sorts of people have been saying, no, wait a minute, we told the president that indeed we are very concerned about what's going to happen in Afghanistan, and he did not heed the warning. And it's always hard for me to say that a person is a liar, because in some cases maybe there are extenuating circumstances. You might remember the old line from the Seinfeld program at one point said, well, it's not a lie if you believe it's true, you know, and so some people actually believe something that you just say, how do they possibly believe that? But I think in this case, it's pretty obvious that indeed we have been lied to for some time. That was the conversation we had yesterday from Glenn Greenwald and the piece that we posted there, but a new piece, Jim Garrity, on the crisis of competence, not only on Afghanistan, but then this will lead into the vaccines. Now, to be fair, sometimes we don't have confidence in a president because he cannot control the reality. And I think it would be very unfair right now to criticize the president because of the increase in number of COVID infections. In case you're not familiar, 99% of the COVID infections right now, the Delta variant, and I'll get into some of that a little bit later, which has led to, of course, everything from vaccine breakouts and breakthroughs. We talked about that yesterday, but I've actually, again, wanted to get into that issue. The need for boosters and the push to try to actually ratify at least Pfizer's been the one that's been pushing it most for additional boosters and also for providing that for pediatric care. So we will get into some of that a little bit later this hour as well. But there are some really good pieces that have been written, and I've had to be kind of careful about which one we pick. But I do think that this one by Michael Brown may be one of the best, and it's entitled 10 Reflections on the Afghan Disaster. I'll go through some of them now and then the rest after the break. But the first is that we have been in Afghanistan nearly 20 years, and yet he points out, his first point is that this is President Biden's darkest moment. He says you can actually begin to understand that when CNN and MSNBC are also criticizing the president, that you can pretty much assume that this is going to be a stain that will be on his presidency perhaps forever. And so there are questions that are being raised in all sorts of sectors, people on both sides of the aisle, people from one end of the media complex to the other. The second one that he puts on here is Michael Brown says, no amount of words or excuses will remove the harrowing images from our memory. The pictures that we've talked about before of people swarming the runways, clinging to aircraft as they take off. And now, of course, what we will also be talking about is the attack on all the girls and women and the rest. Reading a piece today of this one individual, which was, I guess, one of the youngest mayors of one of the towns in Afghanistan, a female, who was just saying, we're just sitting here waiting to die. Because we really don't have, I mean, we can't go anywhere. Where would we go? How would we get there? It's sort of inevitable. And given the fact that she's a woman and also in leadership, the end is obvious. And just to sit there knowing that it's just a matter of days at most before you will be killed is just another one of those sad stories that are coming out of Afghanistan. Not to mention, least of which I should also mention, many of you probably have seen these emails. Some have come from Concerned Women for America. Some have come from Franklin Graham about the number of individuals that are destined to be executed, and encouraging you to pray. And I do encourage you to pray, but I also recognize the harsh reality of what the Taliban is going to bring. And we are going to give you a little bit more understanding of the, if you will, worldview of the Taliban. I probably won't read necessarily today from John Stone Street's Breakpoint commentary in the worldview of the Taliban, although we may get to that today, but that's another place where you can find some of that information. Number 3, Michael Brown says, Biden's legacy will always be remembered in light of his statements last July. We'll come back to those in just a few minutes, but he was making the strong case that there was no circumstance in which you'd be seeing people lifted off the roof of an embassy of the United States in Afghanistan like they were in Vietnam. And okay, maybe they weren't lifted off the roof, but almost the same kind of picture taking place in 2001 that is reminiscent of those who are old enough to remember Saigon in 1975. Number 4, Afghanistan is a staunchly Muslim country. The Taliban are just much more extreme and draconian. And he has a couple of quotes here, one from Robert Spencer, who I'll be quoting from a little bit later, so I'll mention that as well. But even in the original Constitution, if you go back to then President Hamid Karzai, who was certainly just the opposite of the Taliban in terms of radicalist ideology and all the rest. Nevertheless, the Afghan Constitution is written in the name of "We, the people of Afghanistan, believing firmly in Almighty God, rely on His divine will, and adhering to the holy religion of Islam." So, no surprise that, of course, Afghanistan has been, and for any foreseeable future, will continue to be a Muslim country. But after we come back from the break, I might spend a little more time talking about, well, what is so unique about the Taliban. I tried to give some of the facts of that yesterday. Some of that has to do with Sharia law. Some of it has to do with what's called Wahhabism. Some of it simply has to do with reading the Quran in a literal way. A literal fundamentalist interpretation of the Quran leads you to be more violent. Some people say, well, there's some violent images in the Bible. Yes, and a more literal and fundamentalist way of reading the Bible makes you not more violent. It makes you peace-loving. Because what did Jesus say? Turn the other cheek. Love your enemies. Bear one another's burdens. So, again, I will recognize that when you look at the Old Testament, you may see some of that. But if you're a Christian and you believe in the New Testament, and I assume that you would, then you can see that actually a more literal interpretation of the Scriptures, the biblical view, is going to lead you to be more peace-loving. But a more literal reading of the Quran, especially those later surahs, are going to likely make you more violent. But let's take a break, because we've only covered a few of the observations by Michael Brown. We'll continue with those. And then some people say, well, what can we do? Well, Oliver North's got some ideas, and we're going to talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you have heard the phrase crime doesn't pay. Unfortunately, as I explained in my booklet, A Biblical View on Criminal Justice, crime has historically paid only too well. Expected punishment can be calculated by multiplying four probabilities: the probability of being arrested, of being prosecuted, of being convicted, and going to prison. Those probabilities have dropped significantly in cities where the slogan "Defund the Police" has changed the equation. You can find videos of criminals shoplifting and casually walking out of stores in broad daylight. Some commentators have come up with a term for this action: low-speed looting. Last year, we saw lots of examples on television of looting and rioting in major cities. Leftist politicians and even the media referred to such wanton behavior as peaceful protest. Once these criminal acts were redefined, it shouldn't be surprising that we got more of them. The best way to make crime pay is through deterrence. The best way to increase crime is to make excuses for criminal behavior while also reducing police budgets. J.T. Young served as a congressional staff member and in the Department of Treasury in the Office of Management and Budget. He points to cities like Chicago, Baltimore, Portland, and Washington, D.C., where so many crimes occur that it is nearly impossible to keep track of them. He points to one other reason for the crime spike: critical race theory. Any attempt to enforce society's laws is labeled a manifestation of oppression. We see this in the recent calls to defund the police and the previous calls for the abolition of ICE. Rampant crime and an open border are the next result. If we want to lower the crime spike, we need deterrence and a focus on law and order. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again talking about Afghanistan. If you'd like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Love to know your thoughts and comments about what is taking place right now. I've been reading through the first article we've posted here by Dr. Michael Brown. First of all, 10 reflections on the Afghan disaster. Then we're going to get to some of the material that Oliver North has recommended to this president. Whether or not he pays attention to that, we will certainly say, well, what can we do? And there are some things we can and should do. But again, Michael Brown, first of all, talks about that this is President Biden's darkest moment. Number two, no amount of words and excuses will remove the harrowing images from our memory. Number three, Biden's legacy will always be remembered in light of his statements last July. Number four, Afghanistan is a staunchly Muslim country, but the Taliban are just much more extreme and draconian. Those are the first four. The last six, let's go through those. Number five, we should follow the money trail. In case you were wondering, I think the best estimate now, and this comes from Forbes magazine, is over the last 20 years, the United States has spent more than $2 trillion on a war in Afghanistan. That's $300 million per day, every day for 2 decades. And he gives you some examples there. This would be more than the net worths of Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and the 30 richest billionaires in America combined. And you have to ask, what did we get for $2 trillion in terms of investment? So again, if you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Number 6, the swift victory of the Taliban will embolden Islamic terrorists worldwide. 2 days ago, of course, I read a little bit of material from Senator Ben Sass from Nebraska, and he said the same thing, but let me give you another look at this. This comes from Dr. Sejan Gohil, who is a security and terrorist analyst. This is what he told the BBC, quote, "The Biden withdrawal from Afghanistan makes a Taliban takeover inevitable, of course, and gives al-Qaeda the opportunity to rebuild its network to the point where it could once again plot attacks around the world. One of the reasons we went to Afghanistan, it was a bit of a sketchy reason, but at least it made some sense, is that's where Osama bin Laden is. This is where we have allowed a terrorist network to actually flourish, and going in and disrupting that and overturning the Taliban makes some sense." And it did, but then when we got into staying around, nation building, all the rest, that did not make so much sense. Number 7, atrocities are still taking place. You have all sorts of examples. Matter of fact, it has a link to a Facebook post, but that has been removed by Facebook, which, sometimes when they remove them, I'm glad they do, because they're just horrific images. But we will see some of those. We will hear other stories, and we are well aware of that as well. Number 8 does have a video that goes with it that you can watch. We cannot forget the women and girls of Afghanistan. Michael Brown says, take just 45 seconds to watch this video and never forget the tears. While specific individuals will be targeted by the Taliban, such as those just mentioned in the previous point, overall, no one will suffer more than the women and girls of this country. The hopes of a better tomorrow have for now been dashed to the ground. At a time when there had been so much progress for women in that country, that is gone in an instant. And again, that video is still available if you would like to watch it. By the way, this whole article is on our website, pointofview.net. Of course, you can also go to the stream and find it there. Last 2 real quickly, then we'll move on. We need to do some serious soul searching regarding our foreign policy philosophy, for sure. But again, he says it is understandable that we attacked the Taliban in the aftermath of 9/11 20 years ago. They were, as he points out, harboring Osama bin Laden. But with our misguided policies in Iraq leading to national instability, the genocide or exiling of hundreds of thousands of Christians and Yazidis as well, and the rise of ISIS, and now with the total failure of our Afghan policies, we need to ask ourselves some hard questions. And I think around this table, that's exactly what we're going to do. And then number 10, and I don't want to ignore this at all, because we talked about this the other day as I read a piece from our good friend Gary Bauer. We must not forget the sacrifices made by so many Americans and others in Afghanistan. And he goes through the list of the number of American service members killed in Afghanistan, the number of U.S. contractors, which is even higher, and most people are unaware of that, then the number of Afghan military and police, Allied service members, NATO members, and all of the rest. And what of all of those who served and returned to America suffering physical and emotional wounds, and what of the cost to all the families? So there are some really hard questions that are starting to be asked and need to be asked of our leadership. But just before we take a break, let me go to also the piece by Oliver North, because he points out that we were assured that the Afghan army outnumbered the Taliban 300,000 to 75,000. Now we really have some doubts about that. We were assured that the Afghan government had an air force. They really did not. We were assured that by at least withdrawing, this would be safe for Americans, and we recognize that's not the case, although there seems to be at least a little sanity that has come. But there's still a question of many Americans over there, not to mention translators and others who are favorable vulnerable to us and will be executed by the Taliban that can not necessarily make it to the airport, and that's going to be a question to be raised. So Oliver North, because again, being a Marine, having been in the military, having spent some time talking to other individuals, comes up with 8 points, and I'll go through them fairly quickly. Number one, develop a plan for preventing Islamic terrorist groups from using Afghanistan as a safe haven. We've already talked about that. Number two, recognize the Iranian theocracy as America's number one adversary in the region. Number three, ensure access and connectivity for employing U.S. air power in the region. Number four, reinforce the Abraham Accords. Those were established by Trump. Does anybody seriously think Biden's going to do that? I unfortunately don't believe that at all. Number five, understand the Communist People's Republic of China has already promised to recognize the Taliban as Afghan's legitimate government and intends to use the ultimate victor as Kabul 2001 becomes another Saigon 1975. And I want to come back to that a little bit later. Matter of fact, one of our other articles talks about first Kabul, then Taiwan. What goes next? A couple more. Pull out the loyal interpreters as soon as possible, and I hope we can, but I doubt that we will. Number seven, make it clear to the Taliban that they will face massive lethal response if Americans are harmed, and develop plans for fulfilling that promise now. And number eight, make sure all remaining Americans at the Kabul airport can be brought home safely without the help offered by the Chinese, Iranians, and Russians. Otherwise, you should be impeached. And the point he's making is that we have had a dire situation where all the roads into the Kabul airport are controlled by the Taliban. And the big question has been, can even Americans make their way to the airport and be airlifted out? Now, some of that seems to have subsided a bit. But even the press conference today where people said, well, we are given insurance by the Taliban. But remember, this is coming from the Taliban, why we shouldn't believe them or trust them. But if, again, we allow then the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians to help, you have to understand that that would be with some kind of price. Right now, is there some kind of back room blackmail taking place where the Taliban are saying, unless you drop loads of money, we will actually start killing Americans, or if you don't meet our demands, of which who knows what they might even be, I can guess, that we will then take Americans hostage, maybe even kill one, drag them through the street, and force what would they perceive as a weak president to go along with that. So there are some really important questions over the next couple of days that need to be resolved. And so if you have wondered about what should be the response from the government, I think this two-page summary by Oliver North is a very good one. It's the second article we've posted on the website so that you can know a little bit more about that. We come back from the break. Let me, if I can, first of all, introduce you to the man who looks like he's going to be running the Taliban, Baradar, and see if we can give you a little bit of his history. And then what does the Taliban really believe? Well, the key to that, of course, is the issue of Sharia law. So we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But most importantly, I do want to give you a chance to ask a question, make a comment. We'll move from there to what is sort of becoming a crisis of confidence in the president, first with this whole issue of Afghanistan, secondarily with the issue of the vaccine and the virus. So we will certainly spend some time then getting into that topic as well. But if you'd like to join the conversation, we welcome your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after this.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, Make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, at Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View.
The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take some of your phone calls, and I also want to spend just a little bit of time talking about who is the new leader of the Taliban. But as a program note, let me just mention at the top of the hour, Danny Yamashiro, now it's Dr. Danny Yamashiro, will be with us, and Dave Thom, and they are really having an incredible ministry there at MIT. Danny, as you may remember when we've had him on before, was just an incredible evangelist in Hawaii and all over the Pacific Rim. Incredible story. Many people I even referred to him as kind of the Billy Graham of Hawaii, but then decided to go to Harvard, got his doctorate, and we'll talk about some of that in just a few minutes. And we'll see what else we can do in terms of his work. So we will get all of those issues together. And when he actually spoke at Harvard, was kind of interesting, the reaction there. Got his PhD at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School and all sorts of things. So we're going to talk about all of that with him and some of the outreach and kind of change the focus. But the once vanquished insurgent leader is now the likely leader of the Taliban in Afghanistan. That is Abdul Ghani Baradar. And he has been an individual who actually spent time not only in prison, but also was one that had negotiated with Karzai, the former president, the surrender of the Taliban. He also holds a tremendous amount of hatred towards the United States because, if I remember right, it was a wedding back in 2002 where many of his relatives in a wedding were killed by a U.S. airstrike. So right now he's said some conciliatory things, but I do kind of fear what that looks like in the future. But let's see if we can educate you a little bit about Abdul Ghani Baradar, who spent about half of his adult life as an insurgent or as a prisoner, and yet now he, because of the remarkable turn of events, may be the next leader of Afghanistan and the Taliban, which essentially are one in the same. He actually prepared a formal surrender after the U.S. invasion following the 9/11 terrorist attacks. His background is that the original founder and leader of the Taliban is a man by the name of Muhammad Omar. Now, as I mentioned the other day, the word Taliban is Pashto for students. These individuals who were part of what is called the Taliban were actually educated in Pakistan with a very radical view of Islam. They believe in Sharia law. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. And he was very close to the Taliban founder, Muhammad Omar. They both fought against the Soviets when you had the Soviet invasion in Afghanistan. And that goes, of course, back decades ago. Those of you that are older might remember some of that. One of the other people that sort of fought along with them was a man by the name of Osama bin Laden, which is why we came into Afghanistan in the first place. So when the United States came into Afghanistan in 2001, they were bombarding both the Al-Qaeda outposts and the Taliban. And so because of this, Baradar at that point actually negotiated the surrender of the Taliban to, at that time, the newly installed president, which was Hamid Karzai. And so that is an individual that actually was kind of involved in both sides of this conversation and actually has been involved for a long period of time. Then within a couple of weeks, he actually tried to kill Karzai and some of his men, but under heavy U.S. bombardment finally offered his surrender. As I pointed out before, one of the other kind of seminal events in his life was the fact that the United States, because of airstrikes, some of these were from planes, some of these were from drones, killed dozens of people at a wedding of his relatives, and that is a source of some pain and probably the reason for so much anger. But because of the surrender, eventually spent years in a prison in Pakistan. then was released in 2018. You might say, why was he released? Well, that was because both the United States in 2018 and Afghan leaders called for him to be released. And so he has been available now to actually lead, and most likely will be the individual that we will be hearing from over the next couple of weeks in terms of the Taliban. A lot more to say about him, but let's, if we can, maybe get into the Taliban per se. And I didn't post this, but I'm sure you can find it out there on WorldNet Daily or in a number of other places where Jerry Newcomb's been on the program, asked the very good question, what makes the Taliban tick? And his answer is strict Sharia law. If you want to understand more about Sharia law, again, I offered yesterday our booklet on Sharia law. If you want to understand a little bit more about what Muslims believe, of course, I also have offered this booklet that we have on Islam, and those are resources that we have made available to you here at Point of View. But Jerry Newcomb puts it this way, what makes the Taliban tick? Well, there's no mystery. In some ways, it's the same impulse at work in our world for the last 1,400 years. Ever since the hordes of Muhammad, Islam's prophet arose from the Arabian desert and took over much territory as possible. And then talks about some of the various calls to actually begin to move the Muslim army out. And, of course, they conquered all of North Africa, much of what today we would consider to be the Stan countries, and Syria and Iraq and those, and then all the way into Spain. And if it were not for the defeat of the Muslim army at the hands of Charles Martel, the grandfather of Charlemagne, by the way, at the Battle of Tours in 1732, much of Europe would have been Muslim as well. So, again, one of the things that Jerry Newcomb does is spend a little bit of time quoting from some of the people that he's interviewed, and all of these people he's interviewed, we've interviewed here on Point of View. So if you'd like to know a little bit more, you can certainly use the search engine at pointofview.net. Type in some of these names, and you can listen to very long and extensive interviews we've done with each of the people I will be quoting from. One of those is Robert Spencer. He's written a number of books about Islam, probably best known for his The Complete Infidel's Guide to the Quran. And one of the questions that Jerry Newcomb asked is, I've heard that Islam is a religion of peace. And he says, well, it's a religion of peace in the fact that if you read the Quran, and I would not encourage you to read it for your daily quiet time, but if you wanted to read some of the passages, it's available online, so you don't even necessarily have to go to a Barnes & Noble and buy it. You will see that peace is really defined when the whole world comes under Islamic rule, under what's called a caliphate, and thus we all are at peace because we're all under Islamic rule, which is, of course, the ultimate version of Sharia law. He then quotes from Dr. Judy Jasser, who is what many people have called a moderate Muslim and disagrees with the Taliban and the various forms of Islam, and is really trying to bring about some kind of reformation. Because if you are not familiar, many of your Muslim friends, neighbors, co-workers do not hold to the views of Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Taliban, and so there's been a real attempt on the part of some Muslims to moderate that and to point to the earlier passages about peace and to contextualize the later passages that come when indeed Muhammad was in Medina rather than Mecca. One other person he quotes from is Noni Darwish. She's the author of such books as Now They Call Me Infidel and Cruel and Unusual Punishment, in which she talks about the fact that Sharia is an Arab word basically meaning the way. It's the way to live, and it's a set of very detailed laws. And to really understand that, it is to take the various ideas that were indeed implemented in the 7th century and then to apply those to even this day. He goes on to say that Sharia law is often presented to the West as religious law, simply governing how Muslims live out Islam in their private lives, but Sharia Sharia law governs everything from how you wash your hands to how you run a country. And again, in our little booklet on Sharia law, we spend some time giving you some of the passages from the Quran so that you can read those, but then also pointing out that from a biblical point of view, we can reject so many of those ideas because the Bible certainly teaches that men and women are equal. Muslims, non-Muslims, Christians, Jews, Gentiles, slaves, free men, all are one. And this is something which is really at the core of the ideas in Islam, that there are differences and that those who are Muslim should have greater rights than those who are non-Muslims. Men should have more rights than women. And of course, we would reject that from a biblical point of view, as well as, I point out in this booklet, from a constitutional point of view as well. Let's take a break, though. We'll take some phone calls and then get into what has become a crisis of confidence in the White House. All that coming up right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let's see if we can take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Let's go, first of all, to Georgia, Good News Network. Mark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for your show, and it's great information. I guess the question is, why wasn't the U.S. Air Base used as a staging location versus what they're trying to do in Kabul? We had complete control over it for years, and that would have been, to me, logistically the best way to evacuate the country and not follow the Saigon experience.
Sure.
I'll get off later.
And again, if you're not familiar, and some may or may not, back in July, the U.S. military just left. They actually turned off the electricity. They slipped away in the night, not telling anyone. And a couple hours later, the new Afghan commander found out that the Americans just left the airbase. Now, again, you can say, well, they saw the Taliban cover coming and decided to leave. But back to your key point, it would have been a much better place, and if they could have defended it, a much safer place to evacuate individuals. But if you wanted to have an example of cut and run, there it is. We did not even notify the Afghan commander. We, meaning the United States military, did not even notify the Afghan commander 2 hours after the power is off and everyone is gone. Secretly, they realize we're here all by ourselves. So the bottom line is that I'm not even sure it's open at this point. If it is, the bottom line is that that was just simply a withdrawal that took place, and it eliminated the possibility, as we just mentioned a minute ago, of being able to evacuate those individuals. This is not the best chapter in American history, and as we find out more, I think we are going to be even more appalled, which leads me real quickly, since I only have a few minutes left, to talk about what now people are calling a crisis competence. Jim Garrity talks about this, that Chris Salisa on CNN, he quotes from, 7 months into his first term, Biden is faced with nothing short of a crisis of that competence, beset on a number of fronts with developments that appear all of his experience and know-how didn't prevent. You have all sorts of criticism that is being come from various sources. But let's, if we can, quote from the New York Times. The New York Times, and this is a direct quote, classified assessments by American spy agencies, that would be our intelligence community, over the summer painted an increasingly grim picture of the prospect of a Taliban takeover of Afghanistan and warned of the rapid collapse of the Afghan military, even as President Biden and his advisors said publicly that was unlikely to happen as quickly, according to current and former American government officials. Right now, you have people in the Pentagon, you have people in the White House that are just basically saying, we warned the president, but he didn't pay attention. And let's again go back to that July 8th press conference. Mr. President, thank you very much. Your own intelligence community has assessed that the Afghan government will likely collapse. President Biden, that is not true. That is a lie, by the way. Question, is it? Can you please clarify what they have told you about whether there will happen or not? Again, the president, that is not true. They did not. They didn't. They didn't reach that conclusion. We now know that they do. And this is similar to, as Glenn Greenwald pointed out the other day, to the Pentagon Papers. That came out in the work that was done by the New York Times, pointing out that while everybody was saying we're actually moving ahead in terms of Vietnam and we're going to defeat the Viet Cong and the South Vietnamese army is going to be able to defend themselves all the time, the internal papers were saying just the opposite. And we have the same kind of crisis going on here as well. Here are a couple of other quotes that you can find. The president's top generals, including the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, urged Mr. Biden to keep a force of at least 2,500 troops, the size he inherited, while seeking a peace agreement between warring Afghan factions to maintain stability. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, who previously served as a military commander in that region, said a full withdrawal wouldn't provide any insurance against instability. You have quote after quote after quote like that. Well, here's one more. In a series of meetings leading up to his decision, military and intelligence officials told President Biden that security was deteriorating in Afghanistan. They expressed concerns about both the capabilities of the Afghan military and the Taliban's likely ability to take over major Afghan cities. If, of course, this were the other way, and we do have to admit that Donald Trump wanted to withdraw troops as well, but if we had this kind of fact base now, you know that there would have already been a push for an impeachment. Of course, they've already tried to impeach the previous president twice, but I just don't, in this case, see the mainstream media, as much as they've been trying to actually protect the Biden presidency, going along with any of this, because it has become what has been called a crisis of confidence in terms of Afghanistan. But that brings us to the other issue, a crisis of confidence in terms of the virus, because on the 4th of July, you might also remember the president saying that 245 years ago, we declared our independence from a distant king. Today, we're closer than ever to declaring our independence from a deadly virus. It no longer controls our lives. It no longer paralyzes our nation. I'm going to give him the same grace that most people did not give to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not to be blamed for the COVID virus any more than Joe Biden should be blamed for the Delta variant, okay? How you respond to it, okay, that's fair game. But let's first of all remind ourselves that right now we are seeing an enormous number of COVID cases. That gets us into a piece that we posted yesterday. What is the true vaccine breakthrough rate? The CDC doesn't want you to know. So you can go back to yesterday's piece by John Miltimore, in which he points out that there is really seemingly an attempt by the Centers for Disease Control to not actually let you know how many individuals who have been fully vaccinated who nevertheless have the virus. And so part of that has to do with the fact, and I did not know this number until this morning, that almost 99% of all the cases right now are the Delta variant. And so that's pretty significant. And so that's the first issue. Then you have what is being done behind the scenes. In July, Pfizer announced that the FDA intended to provide full approval for their vaccine and make that a priority. The best estimates are maybe you will have full approval by September, but also now the government has decided to endorse booster shots for anyone who has been fully vaccinated. So this is just a whole new kind of if you will, chapter in this long story about the coronavirus. And we also have the question of when, if we will, vaccinate children. The American Association of Pediatrics wrote to the agency just a few weeks ago that they urged the Food and Drug Administration to work aggressively towards authorizing a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine for children under the age of 12 as soon as possible. And so the whole issue of pediatric vaccination now will be on the table, in large part because the Delta variant, they say, has created a new and pressing risk to children and adolescents across the country. So you can see that we are in for it again. That may be a crisis of competence for the president, though he couldn't have predicted it. But I think there are going to be more and more people that are going to be asking a lot of tough questions, not just about Afghanistan, but also about the COVID vaccines and about what steps are going to be taken by the administration going forward. So we've got a lot to talk about. We'll probably cover a lot of that on our Friday weekend edition. But when we come back, we're going to change topics, and we'll spend some time with our good friend, Dr. Danny Yamashiro, and find out what's happening on some of these college campuses. All that coming up right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. Each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about what's going on college campuses, but first, if we can, focus some of our time and attention on the individuals we have had on the program in the past. Danny Yamashiro, now Dr. Danny Yamashiro. You might remember that he was the host and has been the host of a Christian talk show, The Good Life Hawaii. Probably best known for the story that he has told so many times of surviving a deadly 400-foot fall when he was there in Hawaii, surviving that, and nevertheless has used that as an incredible platform for evangelism, founded Jesus Christ is Calling evangelistic ministry, and then, since we've had a chance to talk with him, first of all went to Harvard University, got a master's degree, PhD from Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. In the past, of course, we should mention that he had a bachelor's degree from Biola, as well as a master's degree in Bible exposition from Talbot School of Theology. And I ran into Danny the other day at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and as I heard a little bit more about some of the work he was doing now in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and at MIT, and also heard about his doctoral dissertation on American presidents and childhood trauma. Wanted to get him back on the program. So, Danny, welcome back to Point of View.
Well, it's a blessing to be with you, Kerby. Always is. What an honor to be your friend. Thanks for having me.
In just a minute, I also want to introduce a friend who you are working with, who is one of the chaplains at MIT. But before we get into some of the ministry you have now, for any of our listeners that maybe don't remember the story, I have noticed that even when you spoke at Harvard, you told the story of falling head first 100 feet, then I guess about 300 feet out of the Pali Ridge. And that has been such a platform for your evangelism and your ministry that we should at least tell people a little bit about that, because it's an incredible story and a good example of God's miracle in your life.
Yes, Kerby. Well, it was like Spider-Man and Spider-Woman. I was 18 years old. I was scaling up the top of the ridge. My girlfriend, 16 years old, was beneath me. No ropes, no safety, anything. She fell 20 feet below me. In my attempt to go down and rescue her, I slipped and fell headfirst 300 feet. On my way down, I must have hit my head on a rock at least once, because it tore my scalp off. It was quite graphic, hanging open like a peeled banana. And it was during the rescue, after that first 300-foot fall, that was actually, the second fall was caught on camera. They were just about ready to grab hold of me. I suddenly moved and fell another 100 feet. So needless to say, my brain trauma was a major concern. And not only that, but of course, will he even survive? So they airlifted me that second fall. That's how a lot of my family and friends found out about it. They saw it on TV. The emergency room was packed with people, and I spent 6 hours in emergency surgery, spent about a week in a coma in the hospital for nearly a month. But by God's grace, Kerby, I survived.
Yes.
My parents' family didn't expect me to make it through the night. Doctor said if he does survive, he'll be a vegetable. He'll need 24-hour care for the rest of his life.
But obviously that did not happen because you married Jamie. You have 3 adult children, and since that time you've been to Biola, Talbot, Harvard, Trinity, to mention just a few, and it just had an incredible evangelistic outreach. And I wanted people to know more about that because if people ever go to Hawaii and they hear the name Danny Yamashiro, they're going to go, oh, I heard him on Point of View. And so we still have a link to DannyYamashiro.org. You don't even have to know how to spell his difficult to spell last name. It's all right there on our website at pointofview.net. Well, let's, if I can, introduce another individual that will be part of this conversation as well. And that is an individual that has served as the chaplain there at MIT. And Reverend Dave Thom was formerly with Campus Crusade, now known as Cru, and a faculty chaplain at MIT, but also has been the president of these various roundtables. And this is just an incredible opportunity that we have to bring both of you to the conversation. Project director for the John Templeton Foundation, in which you've tried to bring these various schools together. So, Dave, thank you for joining us as well here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Glad to be with you.
Let's, if I can, talk about what you're doing as the chaplaincy. We, in the past, have spent some time talking with, of course, Matt Bennett of Christian Union. But what you were putting together is even broader than that, looking at not just some of the Ivy League schools, but the opportunity to really have a ministry to the lives of both students, staff, and faculty. So talk about some of the extent of what you've been doing.
Well, by the way, I love Matt Bennett. He's a great guy. We were colleagues in Campus Crusade, and then when he got started with what he's doing, he reached out to me, and we'd been partners in ministry along the way too, because we're both caring about or interested in the future development of these people that go to Ivy League schools for their education.
And again, and we have a link to CambridgeRoundtable.org. So if people say, wait a minute, I know somebody going to one of those schools or somebody in those schools, they can actually connect up immediately. But go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. If they want to reach me by my email address, davethom@mit.edu, that's on the website as well. The Cambridge Roundtable, is the second roundtable that there ever was. We started in Amherst, which we called the 5 College Roundtable. There's the 5 colleges of the Pioneer Valley. And when a friend of mine, a donor and a former student of mine in Athletes in Action, asked me why I was thinking about going to seminary somewhere in Boston, like Gordon Conwell, without taking the roundtables with me, I said, that's actually a great idea. Why not? So I asked certain people if they would be comfortable with me starting a ministry to faculty in the Cambridge area at Harvard and MIT. What I needed to do was talk to some favorite people of mine that I knew from when I was in campus ministry with Campus Crusade at MIT, and they welcomed the idea that I come there. And God just led me to the right people, and a donor really got behind me, and then we started in 2005 and haven't stopped. And since then, spread this vision to 12 places now around the country, including all the Ivies.
Well, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into this a little bit more detail. If you'd like to know a little bit more about Danny and Dave, we have all that information, and it also talks about the 5 colleges in the Amherst area, of course, the Cambridge Roundtable, and some of these other opportunities that exist as well. And so we're going to talk about what's going on college campuses and even what's happening there in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I think you will find this helpful, especially as you maybe are thinking about young people going off to the university, whether they're going to some of these Ivy League schools or just the local state college or junior college. We really want to encourage you to do what you can to help prepare them for what they're going to encounter. That's why we talk about Summit Ministries and the Mind Games Camp and so many other things. But we do need to take a break. So when we come back, we'll come back and continue our conversation with Danny and Dave right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
No doubt you have heard the phrase crime doesn't pay. Unfortunately, as I explained in my booklet, A Biblical View on Criminal Justice, crime has historically paid only too well. Expected punishment can be calculated by multiplying four probabilities: the probability of being arrested, of being prosecuted, of being convicted, and going to prison. Those probabilities have dropped significantly in cities where the slogan "Defund the Police" has changed the equation. You can find videos of criminals shoplifting and casually walking out of stores in broad daylight. Some commentators have come up with a term for this action: low-speed looting. Last year, we saw lots of examples on television of looting and rioting in major cities. Leftist politicians and even the media referred to such wanton behavior as peaceful protest. Once these criminal acts were redefined, it shouldn't be surprising that we got more of them. The best way to make crime pay is through deterrence. The best way to increase crime is to make excuses for criminal behavior while also reducing police budgets. J.T. Young served as a congressional staff member and in the Department of Treasury in the Office of Management and Budget. He points to cities like Chicago, Baltimore, Portland, and Washington, D.C., where so many crimes occur that it is nearly impossible to keep track of them. He points to one other reason for the crime spike: critical race theory. Any attempt to enforce society's laws is labeled a manifestation of oppression. We see this in the recent calls to defund the police and the previous calls for the abolition of ICE. Rampant crime and an open border are the next result. If we want to lower the crime spike, we need deterrence and a focus on law and order. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have with us Danny Yamashiro and Dave Thom. And if you'd like to join us at any point, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have some questions about what's going on in the university. Most importantly, how to reach out to faculty, because in the past we've talked about Christian Union. We've talked about the whole idea of Faculty Commons, which is a ministry of Crew. And now this idea of roundtables. If you go to the link that we have to cambridgeroundtable.org, you don't even have to remember all that, just find the link. There's a section there called Roundtables Nationally, and you'll see so many of those that exist. And if you can have an influence, not just on the students, but on faculty, those faculty have influence for generation of students that they've met as well. Danny, let me come to you for just a minute, because I suspect that the way you met Dave was when you came to Cambridge to go to Harvard. And, of course, you now work together. But tell us a little bit more, because we knew you as an evangelist traveling all over the place, as a talk show host. And then when I ran into you, I found out that in the middle of your career, you decided to go to Harvard. How did that happen?
Well, that was an opportunity to do research. I went there for a summer, and it became a one-year plan that has continued now to 7 years. Research in American presidents, decision-making, and it led to presidents in childhood trauma.
And again, that's what your piece was on. And the trauma from Franklin Roosevelt to Donald Trump, pretty intriguing. Can I stay on that for just a minute? Because I do want to get back to Dave, but I was intrigued by the fact that here your dissertation was dealing with this idea of childhood trauma. I can certainly imagine with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, we're talking about polio in that case, all the way up to Donald Trump. But talk about that for a minute, if you might, because it is a different aspect of looking looking at the American presidents. We have so many historians over the years that have written whole books about presidents, but this is the first time I've heard somebody actually go back and try to make some sense out of the impact that the childhood trauma might have had on them. What did you find?
Yes. So what I did was these first-term elected presidents, 12 presidents, minus Lyndon Johnson and Gerald Ford. What I found about them, Kerby, was really the intersection of childhood trauma and their religious education. What I found was there's almost like a blank slate that takes place, or a reset moment when they experience trauma. People might think, what kind of traumas are we talking about? Normally we think physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse. Well, that's one form. But there's other kinds of trauma in the literature, like head injuries, grief, chronic illness, divorce, war. And I found those things in each of these presidents. And the data was quite revealing.
Amazing. And so, again, that was part of your doctoral dissertation. If people want to read it, is it going to come out in a book, or is it a resource that we can find? Because obviously we have a link to your website. So if anybody would be interested in finding out a little bit more, can they find it on your website, or where would they look?
The book is in process. The dissertation is posted. Just go online and Google American Presidents and Childhood Trauma, and the dissertation will appear.
Fascinating. Well, we may get into that a little bit more in just a minute. But Dave, I want to come back to you, because this idea of a roundtable, I said just a minute ago that it's one thing to have an impact on students, and that is certainly wonderful, and anything we can do to reach out to students going off to college, even while they're in college. But if indeed you can have a positive impact on faculty members, they will actually have an impact over an entire generation. You think of the number of students that will come into contact with a professor if he or she has a very outstanding Christian testimony. That can be a real encouragement. So what have you found?
Well, I found that an opportunity to begin a discussion, begin a relationship, begin a way to have a free pass to walk through a professor's door would mean starting something that they would respect and could be a part of their culture and something they'd enjoy. So that's how the roundtable got off the ground, because it's a chance for a professor to come to a 3-hour event with a very brief speaking involved, but mostly devoted to a time for having a dinner, say, for instance, at the Harvard Faculty Club. And while you're there for the 3 hours, dinner will actually be about like an hour and 15 minutes of discussion with people at your table, probably 6 to a table. And as I make invitations to people and accept their reservations, I know who are the believers, and I can spread them around the room. And so I'm making sure that someone at their table is a believer who has to step up and be able to talk about their faith in the context of the conversation of the moment, with guest speakers coming from all different kinds of angles. But what we really emphasize to the audience is this is a time for you to talk personally and professionally. This is a time for you to just share your thoughts on what's meaningful to you and what's life-changing to you, and share that at your table.
Again, if you go to the website, it gives you some examples of reason, science, faith, and optimism, for example. Or what do scientists around the world think about religion, and why does it matter? I would imagine those would be very interesting, maybe sometimes even heated discussions. How have those turned out in terms of the roundtables that you put together?
Well, every table experience is different. You'll be sitting 6 to a table, and sometimes it might get a little heated, but mostly professors know who they're talking to. They're talking to colleagues who, have strong opinions too. So they know that they're just going to get, pushback in some way. So they mostly behave themselves. It's really hard to hate somebody over dessert and coffee too. So that's why having a meal is like the perfect way to bring out the best in people. Almost like a thankful appreciation is hovering over the time together. Even if they're in a lot of our roundtables, the majority of people at the event are not believers, are not known to be devout. Sometimes we're inviting people we don't even know what their background is. And at Cambridge, because we've been around so long, We practically have people trying to barge in the door, but they're only it's by invitation only. So I keep track of who's coming, and I really don't want the audience to get any more than 50-50 devout and non-devout, so that I have room for the non-devout to be able to have conversations with Christians.
Let's talk about how we can help you, and then we'll take a break and come back and get in some other aspects. But it seems to me that since we broadcast in all sorts of states around the country, some may actually know a professor at a particular university who is in the church with them, or have had some kind of relationship with them, or maybe they were the professor or major professor of one of their kids or grandkids or something like that. It does seem to me that you can maybe even help expand that, since you were talking about now roundtables essentially all over the country, more of them located in the Northeast, obviously, but not exclusively. But are there some ways that even our listeners can help you out?
Sure. If they want to connect me to anybody who's got the guts, you might say, or the time and the energy to pursue setting up a roundtable situation where they are, we can talk through that. There are a couple places in the country that do not get the funding that I'm getting through the John Templeton Foundation. They've arranged for their own funding because they want more control over it. And so those people are doing it without staying connected to me. And I appreciate what they're doing, and I think they're doing a wonderful job. So even those kinds of people, Kerby, that are out there, could just get the idea from us. I'd love to tell them why it works for us, and then see if they can't set up a similar situation where they are.
Again, we have some of those links to our website. First of all, CambridgeRoundtable.org is certainly one resource that you can find, and so that is available on the website. We, of course, have DannyYamashiro.org, Danny Yamashiro Ministries. And when we come back, let's open up the phones. Perhaps you have some comments or questions about what's going on the university campus. And I do want to maybe ask a few more questions about Danny and his dissertation, because it's fascinating. I'd love to know which presidents he found to be most fascinating, and the kind of research he did, and maybe some things we can learn about various presidents that in office have manifested certain kinds of characteristics, and how many of those may actually go all the way back to this idea of childhood trauma of some sort or another. So those are some topics we'll get into, but if you have a question or a comment, we would certainly welcome that opportunity as well. If you'd like to connect up with either of these individuals, we have that information on our website at pointofview.net. As I mentioned a minute ago, you may know a professor that says, I didn't even know this roundtable existed. I'd like to know a little bit more. Or maybe you have a church outreach on the university and they said, well, I never even thought about doing a roundtable. And so we would encourage you to maybe pass that information on to these individuals that you might know, or you might even send them the podcast or even the YouTube video that we're making available right now to them, so they can know a little bit more. Anyway, let's take a break. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @PointOfViewRTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @PointOfViewRTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View Radio Talk Show. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join the conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Danny Yamashiro with us, Dave Thom, and we'll take some phone calls, but also want to encourage you, if you have some questions about American presidents, about what's happening on the college campuses, and a number of other things, those would certainly be good questions to ask, and we are privileged to have both of these individuals with us. So let's head out, first of all, to South Carolina, the Good News Network. Michael, I think you have a question about the American presidents.
Yes, thank you. What a great discussion, and it really caught my attention when you were talking about a dissertation on childhood trauma experienced by various presidents, and I think suffering can really form our faith and form our life as believers, and I was just wondering if your guests had any stories from their studies of suffering that a particular president had gone through in their childhood that had formed authentic Christian faith and would be of inspiration to us to hear. They could share. And I'm going to go to the website, too, and put it in Google and look at your dissertation, too. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, Michael's asked a good question. What about those in terms of authentic faith? And Danny, obviously, will come to you because as an evangelist, you understand what authentic faith is. And it's always been sort of hard to sort out, but you've been looking at the biographies and autobiographies in some cases of these presidents. So how would you answer Michael's question?
Yes, Kerby. So Michael talked about suffering. Here are just a few examples. You know, how many people understand or realize that Clinton experienced tremendous violence as a child? You know, how many kids actually had their stepfather fire a gun in their direction, or see their father pinning their mother against a washer dryer with scissors at her neck? And that's just Clinton's story. You look at Nixon and Bush with, losing their siblings as children, leaving them in great despair and depression. Truman was paralyzed. Obama, his parents were divorced. And the naughty kid Trump, very few realize that he was abused, physically abused, as a child on numerous occasions when he was at New York Military Academy, physically abused. So when we look at their faith, I think it depends. It depends, in answer to Michael's question, who were their mentors? What were they taught at that time when they were going through these traumas? Clinton as a Baptist. What was interesting with Clinton is he was the devout kid going to youth group, leading Bible studies, and he kept all this trauma away from any of his friends. No one ever knew until he was running for president. And that's one example. So when we talk about authentic faith or devout faith, it's more complex, much more complex than us just stamping our approval on someone because of the experiences that they've gone through. Sometimes their experiences show a strong faith, and at other times their faith, even as kids, show that they were really searching. Like Reagan, for example, as a child, already began showing signs of an ability to live in two different worlds. He was very observant about things in a quiet way, which is something that many might have seen as a contrast to his public persona when he was president. That's just a quick snapshot, Kerby.
But again, what you're talking about is some of these individuals were influenced one way or another towards faith or away from it. And I've, before I go on to maybe our next phone call, you can see how a trauma or a suffering sometimes causes you to be closer to God. And then you see some individuals who are encountering suffering and that causes them to doubt God. And you look at some of the writers of Humanist Manifesto, some of the leading atheists, they actually rejected the idea of God because they could say, how could I have lost a child, a sibling, a friend, whatever? And so it is interesting that it sometimes drives you to God, sometimes it drives you away from God. And you probably see that as well in some of the presidents, don't you?
Yes, but here's the crux. A lot of this has to do, in terms of their faith, with their religious mentors that intersected. Many of them were influenced by their parents. It could be a mother, it could be a father. Their involvement with church. Those things really shape. So you talked about some of these other leaders that you referred to who went in another direction. But the importance of who their mentors are during the time of trauma is critical.
Fascinating. Again, as the book comes out, we'll give it some attention as well. Let me take another phone call here real quickly. We'll go to Ohio. And Tim, thank you for joining us today. You're on with Danny and Dave.
Hi. So glad to be a part of today's thing. I was curious about a couple of things. One is a brief thing about my personal background. I'm an alumnus of the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville, and while I was there, I focused my studies in this area of science and religion as well. And without going too much more into my own background, I was wondering about the need for either additional help or what you're doing in the Boston area, or if you had any plans if you had any activities at universities here in Ohio, particularly Dayton, where I live, or Columbus at Ohio State.
Okay. Dave, what about that? Because there's some opportunities, aren't there, for individuals to maybe participate in that way?
Sure. I have a friend and colleague from way back, Howard Van Cleve, who runs faculty ministry at The Ohio State University. And I'm sure if our friend here would like to contact him, he could find him through InterVarsity's faculty ministry outreach. And then I'm sure Howard does a lot on science and faith, because those are the two things that are in the headlines all the time. And they don't mix very well until you try to talk about them, and then you realize there's overlap in both ways. But I tell people when we have a science and faith roundtable that if they go home more confused than when they came, we're probably doing the right thing, because there are so many things to think about when it comes to science and faith.
So again, let's talk about some of those opportunities, because even in the material that you have there, I see some pretty robust debates about the role of science and whether or not science can answer some of our important questions. And some of our atheist friends and some of our humanist friends are convinced that all I need is science and I don't even need the faith part of that equation. That seems to be one of the big debates right now taking place on a lot of college campuses.
Yeah, I think so. If we'll get some data on our site pretty soon about how the last roundtable we had featured George Church, and if you look him up, you might figure out that he's probably the leading geneticist in the world in terms of his influence, in terms of his financial. I mean, just his budgets that he has devoted to what's going on in genetics. And when we had him featured at this last roundtable in June, he talked about how important it was to him to understand where people of faith are on the topic, because he knows that what he does in the lab is going to affect everyone in America, and he wants to know whether or not he's going to be welcomed or pushed back or told to modify his program. So those people are listening to what people of faith have to say.
Very interesting. Are there certain topics that are starting to, maybe we'll take a break and we'll come back and talk about that. I'd like to go around the round table and talk about some of the things that you have felt were some of the big issues. Right now, of course, there's a lot of discussion about critical race theory, but then you always, of course, have the perennial issues about why is there evil in the world if there's an all-powerful, all-loving God? Certainly some of the questions that are surfacing about origins and a number of others. So I'd like to go around just before we run out of time today to find out what you find are some of the kind of the hot topics on campus, so that if nothing else, we can prepare young people. They could be our children, our grandchildren, whoever that are heading off to the university, that they are amply prepared and really able to give an answer for the defense and be able to give an answer for the hope that is in them, and also be able to defend their biblical worldview. So let's take a break. If as we're going to the break, if you would like to join the conversation, feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. If you would like to know a little bit more, of course, we've just mentioned a minute ago, we have the CambridgeRoundtable.org, and there, if you would like to know more about some other topics in other roundtables, that exists, obviously, on our website. And, of course, then we also have a link to Danny Yamashiro's ministry, as well as Jesus is Calling, and that is a very outstanding website as well. Jesus Christ is Calling You, evangelistic ministry. So all of those resources and links are on our website. And if you'd like to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Danny Yamashiro, as well as Dave Thom with us. And Dave, let me come to you first, because as a chaplain, you probably have not only thought about this, but run into various issues in the various roundtables. What do you think are some of the kind of the hot topics on campus today? Some of them are timely, some of them are timeless, but what are some of the issues that, whether it's students or faculty, are really trying to address here in the 21st century?
Well, I'll tell you what some of the Christian professors are trying to make clear about certain issues. Two of the best science professors in science that speak around the country are right here at MIT. Ian Hutchinson, nuclear science and physicist, and Rosalind Picard, who's in artificial intelligence. When Ian speaks around the country, he's talking about scientism, where we try to think that the whole world is interpreted only through science, and that's the only truth that there is. And Ian's quick to point out that couldn't be true. You couldn't even make that as a sentence in English to make sense. So people not knowing that they're overboard in scientism is probably pretty important. And I think parents can learn how to talk about this as well. And then Roz Picard, in her efforts at helping people to understand artificial intelligence, one thing that she's really good at is explaining that a machine can't possibly know more than you tell it. And so there's really no reason to fear that robots are going to take over the world. But then she dovetails that with, a machine basically knows its creator only as much as the creator tells it about itself. And if God himself has told us about himself, wouldn't it make sense to find out about who he is? And she just has a great way of making that clear to people and sharing her own testimony of how she came to Christ as a youth in a college situation.
Very good communicator, MIT Media Lab. I've got a son-in-law has got a book coming out next year, Simon & Schuster, on the whole issue of artificial intelligence and robots and all of that. And what's kind of intriguing is of course, I watch all the TED Talks. There's a great TED Talk done right now about artificial intelligence showing that it isn't that they're going to take over. It's that if you don't give them enough information, you come up with some really bizarre things that these AI programs do, and I know she's been kind of an expert on that as well. So anyway, just a kind of an interesting idea.
That's true.
And certainly I'm more familiar with her, but nevertheless, those are two individuals and two really good topics. But just before we run out of time, Danny, I want to come to you as well, because you've been kind of delving into this both in history and also apologetics and theology. What are kind of some of the issues that you are seeing that students and faculty are dealing with right now?
Well, humanness, I think that's a great point of intersection. Just that word, the depth of conversation that can be held by that. I recently spoke to a couple of professors recently, and they come from various backgrounds. They're not believers as far as I know. One talked about being an agnostic, but we could talk about humanness and humanity, and therefore, branch out to other areas. Which brings me, Kerby, to this aspect again about childhood trauma. What can be, arguably, the human aspect of seeing the President of the United States realizing, yes, not only was he a child, but a child that experienced trauma. And trauma relating to humanity broadly could give us hope. I mean, the notable response would be, well, then things go downhill after trauma. But my research shows that trauma is opportune, not in an opportunistic way, but opportune for spiritual formation, social formation, and leadership formation, if held or done or guided by strong spiritual, and may I say even Christ-like or Christ-centered mentors.
Very good. Again, if people want to contact either of you, of course, we have your websites there, and I do think that there's a whole lot more of a conversation we need to take. And Danny, as soon as the book comes out, let's, if we can, schedule another interview and kind of work our way through the various presidents and learn a little bit more about that, because I certainly want to make that available to our listeners. And Dave, again, we just, of course, had the one call from Tim, but there's some others I think would like to contact you and find out, can we set up a round table in our area? This seems like a great model, and maybe they can learn from you so they don't make all the mistakes. They can learn vicariously so that to get it all right the first time. So you're open, both of you are both open to being contacted off air, aren't you?
Absolutely. Sure.
And Danny, it was just great to run into you at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. Say hi to your wife, Jamie. And maybe the next time I'm up there in Cambridge, I'll come and get to see both of you, because I remember last time I was up there and I was actually taking my daughter down, of course, Freedom Trail, going to Harvard, going to MIT. Went to MIT to buy some of the books that actually ended up being used in that Simon & Schuster book coming out next year on artificial intelligence, as well as robotics and things of that nature. But love Cambridge, even though I went to New Haven. You'll still probably accept me as well. And it is just so great to have you both on the program. And as always, look forward to the next opportunity.
Kerby, we'll put you on the invitation list at Yale and at Harvard. So how's that sound?
That sounds pretty good. Well, we're going to take a break, but good. Danny and Dave, thank you for being with us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby.
Let me just mention real quickly that we tomorrow are doing our Millennial Roundtable. Chelsea will be sitting in on this chair, and it'll be an opportunity to hear from those who are part of Generation Y. I have, by the way, been doing a lot of interviews on our Probe Ministries survey of religious attitudes and ideas. So sometimes I come to this program already having done today a television program, or tomorrow will be a radio program. And on Friday, I guess I'm doing 2 radio programs before I do this radio program. And so we certainly have been talking about what's going on with Generation Y and Generation Z. So I know you'll appreciate that conversation that will be taking place tomorrow in terms of our Millennial Roundtable. But then on Friday, of course, we will have our weekend edition. Penna Dexter and Kelly Shackelford will be with us. Let me just, as we're winding down today, mention first of all that my Viewpoints commentary is on the spike in crime. And when you start saying that we should defund the police, guess what? Well, then sometimes crime goes up. And I really take on that idea that crime doesn't pay. The sad reality is crime does pay too often, because if you look at some of the probabilities of your expected punishment after you've looked at, of course, your probability of being arrested, probability of being prosecuted, probability of being convicted, and probability of going to prison. Unfortunately, crime sometimes does pay, and it really pays now when you've had defund the police and also a decision by a number of district attorneys not to prosecute certain kinds of crimes. That is certainly one thing that we talk about on the Viewpoints commentary, so I would certainly encourage you to find that information and maybe pass it on to others. As we wind down, though, let me also mention that we encourage you to consider what you might do to support this ministry. And this has been a pretty good year for Point of View, because I think many of you really do believe in us as a trusted source of news and information. But I did look at some of the numbers for those people that had donated in July and noticed that those numbers were down a little bit, partially because the average gift was down. And I suspect that some people have not been able to maybe support this ministry during the summer, and summer is always a difficult time. So if you appreciate some of the conversation we've had over just the last 2 hours or this last week so far, I hope you might click on that button that says donate and support this ministry. Also, please support the radio station that makes it possible for us to broadcast this program to you as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for the help behind the scenes. Millennial Roundtable tomorrow and our Friday weekend edition on Friday. We'll see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.